Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to view Cherry from 2021. So I was just kind of curious about this film, so I decided to check it out. So, come to find out, this movie does have a good first half, but I think we also have a movie that is slow and just eventually just gets slower. So, for this movie, we have Tom Holland's character who plays, or Tom Holland who is playing Cherry. So we have a character that at first gets kind of these odd jobs and then eventually decides to go into the military. And then after the military, it seems that we have Cherry that's dealing with a lot of PTSD. And so he tries to hide or get away from that PTSD by taking drugs. And then drugs will lead him into needing to pay for those drugs. And so he decides to go into being a bank robber. And so the longer and longer that this guy just keeps getting away with all these bank robberies, I just find that kind of suspicious. But then towards the end of the film, we of course have to wrap this up in some way. And so with that said, uh, we also have a love story here. And we have Cherry that at some point is to find the love of his life from a girl named Emily, who I really liked this actress because, of course, I had seen her in a show called Wayne. And so I was like, ooh, she's in this movie also? Like, I was interested about that. So, with that said, also, it seems that Emily is to find herself into being mixed into drugs as well as Cherry is. And so, uh, hence why they kind of quickly realize that they need to go on and start to rob banks. So, to kind of continue their addiction or their habit. So, with that said, I thought this movie was bad. But again, I just liked that second half. I feel like this movie has at some point where I would just want to click off on it at a certain point of this film. Especially when we start to get into the drugs, I start to heavily lose interest. So, with that said, regardless of what I have to say, because maybe you want to go out of your way to see this movie yourself, because maybe this movie, still regardless of what I have to say, sounds interesting to you, I will go on and without further ado list certain places that you can go on and see this movie for either a subscription or absolutely free. So, I think this movie at some point was available on Apple TV Plus or Apple Plus, but I'm going to go on and list other apps so you can dare in fact watch this movie for free. So, first off, there is a app that had changed its name to now be Zelliphonic. Zelivonic. Zelliphonic. This used to, of course, be Colonist Goal. At some point, they might go on and change the name of this app for whatever reason that it already has. So, you can also find other apps like Vidlesy, Vidlesy, or Yes Movies, or you can go on and just go through a number of reviews that I've done over time and find a listing of a number of different apps so you can watch a ton of stuff for absolutely free. Um, so, with that said, let's go on and let's really just get into the spoilers at this point in time because I've kind of gone through this movie, and so even though I state that it is bad, I'm still willing to just kind of talk about this film and kind of go more in depth about it. So let me know in the comments below if you were to ever have checked out a movie like this or a movie that was Cherry. So, and kind of let me know how you felt. So, cause yeah, like I thought that this movie, I was like, okay, like they really could have figured out a way to better explain this through trailers, because whenever I was to watch the trailers, like, I don't think it did a good enough way to like explain what this movie really is. But like, I don't think the movie even explains really all that well what it really is. So with that said, let's go on and let's get into this film. So in the very beginning of it, let's just go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time he's spoil. Let's go into it. So Cherry's 23 and he doesn't know what people do anymore. He goes on and bizarrely to mention that he likes trees in the beginning of this film for whatever reason. So life might have been wasted on Cherry is how he feels. And so Cherry is to go on and talk to this driver who we will find in the later part of the film will be a guy named Black who wants money from Cherry. And so Cherry is wearing generic clothes and a scarf to cover his face, but he's been doing this for a long time, and so anybody could probably tell his face and what it looks like at some point if they were to go on and ID him. So Cherry goes into the bank to rob this bank, and he has a sad face, so he needs to not look like a wussy and just kind of be strong. And so Cherry talks nice to the teller because that's what you're, I guess, supposed to do. And he forces her to open the drawers. So when he starts to look into the teller's eyes, he sees sadness. And he kind of takes it in. So this moment all of a sudden has Cherry have his like whole life flash before him, is what I'm assuming that this moment really is. So we kind of have to start out at the real true beginning of Cherry's life and where's the point of that we really should give a crap. So starting off, we have to have Cherry who is to have seen Emily for the first time at this school. And the first thought that came into his mind is that he wanted to sleep with this woman. He wanted to F her. So we have Cherry after this class is over, this English class. He walks off and is to have kind of headphones or earbuds or whatever in his ears. And so Emily is to like hit Cherry, and so Emily is to tell Cherry that she had tried to call him numerous times and he didn't answer. He's like, oh, I'm sorry, I had music in my ears. So Emily starts talking to Cherry about like their English class, and so like Cherry's like, well, yeah, like so Emily starts walking off, and so Cherry's like, well, hey, like, where are you from? And she mentions that she's from New York. It's the same kind of town, and like she just kind of goes on and on about it. So Cherry's to mention that he does have a girlfriend named Madison. I think he even has a picture of her. So Cherry would have loved to have like continue to like talk with Emily and be with her, but he has another obligation to Madison to go on to a Greyhound to meet with her at her dorm. And I guess like Madison is going to be at the dorm alone because her roommate was to have her grandmother die. So Madison thought that Cherry was a man that I guess she could control. In other words, Cherry thought that Madison thought that he was basically a bitch, but I thought I would kind of try to avoid cursing as much as humanly possible through most of this review. So she took him to crappy parties, and some like basement red light district bullshit. So some random guys would just always know Madison, as if every guy would have been with Madison at some point in their lives. And so we have Cherry that doesn't know if he really wants to be with a girl like Madison, who is to just jump on a table and start dancing as if she's dry humping a ghost. So Cherry works. He works at some restaurant. He would rather do anything else, but he works anyways. So Cherry working at this restaurant is to notice the owner's whole family of seemingly only women works at this restaurant. If he ever was to have gone on and seen a male in this family, uh, he would Cherry would be massively surprised because he would never see one. So the waiters at some point would be guys, and they would talk to Cherry about how crazy some of these women are, and like tell him all kinds of crazy tales. So Fatuk, who is the owner of this place, is to force Cherry to make this pizza bread and to kind of like toss it up in the air, like the old fashioned ways of kind of doing pizza. Immediately when I saw like Cherry going on and like kind of like pressing down this bread, like I was immediately like, oh, like he's working at some pizza joint, because I had a bread that looked just like that when I worked at Little Caesars, when I kind of covered some of their breaks, which were only like 30 minutes. I don't think I really did pizza all that well, but also I was hoping that I could figure out a way to not have to do that kind of job, because I was more interested in my retail job and not really interested in wanting to cover for Little Caesars. Like, I just wasn't. I was kind of forced into doing that job, and it's not something that I really wanted to do, because I was already having to like unload all of these trucks, which was a arduous job anyways, and I don't think I was getting paid enough. But again, when we find out later that uh, that Cherry is getting paid like $8 an hour, I thought that that was crazy anyways, because like eventually I was getting paid more than that doing some retail jobs later down the road, I guess because of experience, but either way. So back into the story. So we have at one point the Cherries have to like toss this bread uh, into the air, and we have Fatuk, who's the owner, that is very upset with Cherry because he didn't toss it up high enough. He just starts to cuss him out. So we of course find out that Cherry didn't last very long at that job. He ended up getting fired like 2 weeks in just because he couldn't toss bread high enough, I guess. So Cherry talks about James's family, because James is to seemingly be his friend. So and then James is to drive Cherry to the bank because Cherry has a problem with some overdrafts. And so he goes to the bank to try to clear this situation up. Come to find out when he goes to the bank, like there's nothing that with what Cherry can say and the people at the bank can say to just kind of correct this whole issue. So we how while they're driving to the bank, they pick up two guys named Joe and Roy, and we find out that they're painters, and they start talking about Joe possibly joining the Marines. Here's the thing: between these two guys, both Joe and Roy, we'll find out a lot more about Joe than we will about Roy. Like Roy just becomes this kind of forgotten character, but I have to go on and mention that also. So we had Cherry go to the bank and nothing worked out. So by the time that he leaves this bank, we find that James's car is like smoking and it almost kind of bursts into flame. And so they realize, like, okay, well, this car is like literally toast. So they walk on back while smoking a joint to feel like winners again. So Cherry was to go on and see some friends, and they go on to trade drugs between one another. We find that Cherry has some panic attack medication that he trades for ecstasy. So Cherry is to take ecstasy, and so he gets invited to this party, so he goes to this party. Come to find out, that leads him back to meeting up with Emily. So when Cherry is to like realize, like, oh my god, Emily, and so like Emily is to even call Cherry over. So when Emily looks close at Cherry, she realizes that his pupils are huge, and so obviously he's high. So we have Cherry that's like, well, yeah, I did take drugs. Like, if you want, I can go and get some for you. And Emily's like, no, I was already offered drugs by somebody, and I turned that person down because they were kind of weird about it. And so Cherry, of course, who is high, is to make the mistake by admitting that he does like Emily. So we have Cherry and Emily that start to make out at this party. And Emily is to ask about Madison, and Cherry says that that girl is cold-blooded. If anyone was to have ever gone on and seen the Dave Chappelle show, that's where I got that from. Cold-blooded. Anyways, seeing it like that. So Emily lets Cherry do whatever he wants to her because she just starts to take off her clothes and present herself on the bed. Cherry kind of touches Emily on the chest and then starts crying. We have Emily that is to go on and comfort Cherry, and we have Cherry that's like, why are you being so nice to me? And she's like, well, I don't know, maybe I just like white boys. So the next thing we see, and this is to happen later on, is Emily is having this conversation with Cherry about her listening to her father's conversation on the phone. Come to find out, her father was having an affair. So Emily had confronted her father about it, and so he bribed her to kind of keep this quiet by going to some like volleyball camp or something like that. Emily, of course, really wanted to go to the camp, so she took that bribe. But then when she came back home, she then immediately told her mother about the affair. So then the parents went on and had this argument. So we have right then and there where like they're just kind of talking about things, and Cherry tells Emily that he loves her, and we have Emily that just says thank you. So we have at some point when Cherry and Emily are to meet up again, Emily tells Cherry that she's leaving for Montreal. And that, of course, is Canada, if you don't know. At some point, they say Montreal, and then certain points, they say Canada. So we find out that Emily is leaving for Montreal to go to school. And so we have Cherry that's like, oh, so we're going to have to break up then. Because, like, you're, like, going to a school that's, like, far too away and so on and so forth. And, like, we're, like, the distance is probably going to break us up. So Cherry just realizes that they should just break up, and so he's very upset. So Cherry decides that he's just going to go on and enlist into the military. So we have Cherry that goes into this guy to enlist in the military, and so this guy starts talking to Cherry about like, well, hey, like, why did you just decide to enlist in the military? And so we have Cherry that goes on. It's like, well, yeah, I just started feeling sad about my breakup until I started watching on the news, and these guys are dying overseas, and I was like, well, hey, like, maybe I shouldn't feel so bad, and maybe I should just enlist. So we have Cherry that ends up getting sworn in. So next we have Cherry that's at James's house. So James is to argue with friends, and we all of a sudden hear a phone ring in the background. It's like, hey, somebody needs to go on and get that phone. So Cherry ends up getting the phone, and coincidentally ends up being Emily calling. So Emily's calling to state that she's leaving but wants to see Cherry one last time. So Cherry's like, well, I would love that too, but I'm also going to go to work right now. Come to find out, Cherry's working at this bar that is to go on and give people free drinks. That's the kind of perk of working there. So Emily shows up at this bar with another guy named Benji. And so Cherry is to look at Benji and kind of shake his hand really hard, realizing like, well, hey, like I'm like kind of ticked that you're being with this girl, and so on and so forth, with this firm handshake. So Benji tries to leave and is to offer like another alternate restaurant, but so Cherry is to pull Emily aside to talk about why she brought someone else here while trying to say goodbye to Cherry. And so Cherry realizes that he's like, well, you know what? Like, I'm just going to go on and I just need to go back to work. So we have Cherry that is to start to just get very emotional because his feelings are just very raw and so on and so forth. So we have the owner that's telling Cherry not to get emotional, that he'll go on and bang plenty of women in his life, or maybe he'll just go on and just end up with Zendaya, and that will just really work out. Who knows? Maybe I'm going on and saying that now, and at some point in the future, maybe it won't work out, sadly enough. But hopefully it does. Either way. Uh, so we have the owner that also wants Cherry to look after Tommy, who is to be a drunk that is call out most people fake, and wouldn't and none of these people would have the balls to murder anybody. Shoot him in the head is bizarrely what he keeps saying over and over again. As the bar closes, Tony is the only one left at the bar, and we start having them talk about, uh, of course, Cherry enlisting in the army. And so Tommy's like, no, like, no, they don't really care about you, right? Like, and so a lot of times when, in all honesty, like, you would realize that certain enlistment or certain people that recruit people are really just to, like, in all honesty, like, get a certain quota or a certain number of things. But um, that's like the truth of it all, because I know people who are or have been recruiters. But hey, like, um, for a lot of people that go on and do it for other reasons or whatever, like, I completely get that also. So, like, if anybody who is an actual recruiter out there, like, you probably understand what I mean, or also you're going like, no, 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 like, that's not the truth at all, or whatever. Maybe there's a duty or whatever to it also, but anyways, but most of the time it's just to kind of make a quota. So, anyways, we have, of course, Cherry, who is to want to leave for the night because like he's closing up. So Tommy's like, well, hey, how about I drive you home? Yeah, the severely drunk guy driving Cherry home makes a lot of sense. So we, I guess, have had Tommy, who is to probably crash into a number of things and is to hit into the curb for good measure by the time that Tommy brings Cherry home. So we have Cherry that makes his way to his place to find Emily there waiting for him. I was like, oh, this is such a nice moment. I really like this. So, come to find out, Cherry was to have had this like box of these muffins that he wanted to send somehow or give somehow to Emily as like a goodbye cake, but they didn't have any cake, so they just got muffins. And plus, also, Cherry had to give one of these muffins to Tony, who desperately needed to eat because this guy was probably very hungover. So, Emily is to just tell Cherry that she won't go to Canada, and Cherry has to admit that he had joined the army to Emily. So, she only wanted to go to Montreal, so that way she could just get away with or get away from Jerry because she really just does love him. And so Cherry just decides like, well, hey, like, how about I go on and I go into the military, and you go on and you go to school in Montreal, and we just kind of both do this, and we'll still be together. Like, all it is just a few months and a lifetime together. So, or a few years and a lifetime together. So, we even have to the point where Cherry and Emily are wanting to, like, really state how much they love one another by quickly getting married at a courthouse. So, Cherry then goes into basic training, and that's where the movie starts to kind of like really starts to take a turn here. It doesn't really become as interesting, but in all honesty, like, even after we get um past like Cherry like finally leaving the military, that's when things even get a turn for the worse. So, anyways, this might be at some point where people will, in some point in the movie, just kind of no longer be interested. So, Cherry goes into basic training and is to get a haircut there. For some people that don't know, for the military, there are certain hairstyles and certain things that you like have to abide by there. Um, and so yeah, so like they would of course probably have you cut your hair more often than you should, or have certain kind of styles because military. So, and we of course have Cherry, who is to just get a crew cut because it makes sense. So Cherry mentions that he has to go on and to have gotten a lot of shots and found out that he's colorblind. And so Cherry's like, well, that makes a lot of sense. So he wants to be a medic and wonders if his colorblindness will affect him being able to do that. So the nurse is like, well, you do know what the color of blood is, right? And Cherry's like, well, yeah. It's like, you'll be fine. So excuse me. So we have Cherry that mentions that the military is a lot of standing around, and so Cherry bizarrely had to take off a lot of his clothes and walk like a duck. Cherry is to meet up with a guy named Hernandez, and they had made quick friends together, and coming to find out, they had both wanted to become medics together. So Jimenez wanted to go into the military because his girlfriend that he loves was to have become pregnant. And so instead of them kind of aborting the baby, they decided it's like, well, no, like her Jimenez is going to uh, like get a good job and go into the military and become a medic so he can support his family. So we end up having like kind of training and all these kinds of things where we have these drill sergeants who of course are to do these kind of weird goofy cusses that make no rational sense, but they're there anyways. So we come to find out that these drill sergeants are suffering from PTSD, and so that was the supposed reason that like they would give for these sergeants being as weird as they are. We would even have at one point where Cherry would get punched in the manhood, let's just say, in the bathroom after he was done peeing. Or we at one point had one of the drill sergeants choke out one of uh, these guys because he was kind of dressed in this simulation as a certain person. So some people had stories they couldn't trust when Cherry was to hear them. Cherry did firing drills. He wasn't sure if even the military was the military anymore. Like he was just kind of really confused about what was really going on there. So anyways, come to find out the only way to fail basic training was to try to off yourself. And so there was one guy who was to kind of take a rope and go to tie it onto this pipe. The pipe broke, and so Cherry like found out what was going on. It's like, oh hey, yeah, I guess this guy was trying to fail basic training. So uh Cherry was to go on and try to sneak out and call Emily at certain times. So Cherry would find out how to be able to become a medic by going on and performing certain medical duties on mannequins. So at some point, both Cherry and both Jimenez had saved 47 mannequins, and I guess that was to be good enough for them to pass, to become real legit medics. So we have all the guys going on, and they're to have this drill sergeant tell them that they need to come up with a company cheer, which means like all the guys together need to come up with some kind of goofy cheer. Since they didn't come up with one, he came up with one, and so Cherry, bizarrely, considering he was the guy that was kind of holding his flag, had to go on and do this robot, and so he weirdly just kind of states like, "Yeah, nobody ever go into the military." Like, wow, what a good way to sell this film. So we come to find out that Cherry's first operation, or his first mission, was to at least be something that he did while he was wide awake. for okay, so we have Cherry that goes into this mission where kind of guns are blazing and shots are to be fired. So we have Cherry that's not quite sure what he's to do, but we have him being grabbed by one man and saying like, "Hey, follow me." So they end up finding a man where they have to kind of push his guts back into his stomach and kind of wrap his chest. And so we have this guy being prepped to go into this helicopter, and so we have Cherry who ends up saying this like weird line that he regrets saying it. He's like, "I got you, man, I got you." And so for some reason, I guess he just needed some clever line to say there. But so Cherry gets back after this whole uh, mission is over, and when Cherry is to shower with Jimenez, I believe, we have at one point where uh, there is blood that won't wash off the man's wedding ring. So we have, of course, some of the guys who are kind of interested in what happened with Jimenez and Cherry, and so they go on and tell them what had happened and talked about that helicopter. And so we have a guy named, I believe his name is Arnold, that goes on to tell the guys, well, hey, those guys in the helicopter, they died. And so Cherry goes on and confirms if they are dead, and so the guy who is Cherry's superior is like going like, no, like don't believe what that guy just tells you. So everything was about death, it seems. Like they would have these kind of code names and Triangle of Death and all this kind of weird stuff. So, and the army was to seemingly be like scarecrows, just kind of warning people off certain areas. So the next thing that we would kind of see after that is cheerleaders arriving at Christmas. So basically, we have these soldiers that are to go on and be like, ooh, ah, about all these cheerleaders. Like, ooh, wow. Like, man, I can't imagine, like, me getting to see these women, like, oogling them, basically. Basically, having them as SEX symbols. Cherry didn't even think about women much. And certain points he would go on into the porta johns and jerk it, but he was always just thinking about Emily. He has his images in his mind where Emily is just kind of swinging on this swing, and she's just kind of wearing very little. So Cherry is to talk to Emily while like people are kind of waiting in line to use the phone. So Emily is to talk about getting a starter home, and that seems to be the only really thing that like they can get out of the conversation. So Cherry goes on and leaves and is to kind of do some checking on certain people, and so Cherry sees a man's hands and is to realize that this guy is to need antibiotics. So they are fresh out of antibiotics. So Cherry goes this superior of his, who I believe is his like private or superior or whoever, is like, well, hey, like this guy really needs antibiotics, but we don't have any. So this guy's to tell Cherry, it's like, well, tough crap, like we don't have it, so like this guy just needs to go on and just find it elsewhere. So Jerry just tells the guy that he needs to go to a hospital and get antibiotics. So he just kind of wraps his hand, and that's all he can do. So we go on to have Cherry that gives some food rations away to a little girl, And once he goes on and does that, we have the girl who ends up getting these food rations like stolen away from her. And so like man, you made a really nice gesture to that girl, and like somebody just took it away from her. So Cherry and Jimenez are talking about tacos, so they just desperately want tacos. And they're kind of worried that if they are to go home, that maybe their wives are to be with other men. And now they're going to have to go on and kind of take care of those men. So, uh, we just have Cherry that's like, man, I just want to go home. I just want to go home so badly. So, we go on to have these guys go into these kind of Humvees. I'm just going to call them vehicles because that's kind of the easy way to just kind of explain these vehicles that they're in. If anybody has gone on and seen the beginning of Iron Man 1, then like you'll know what kind of vehicles that these guys are in. The Funvies. Yeah, I'm sure they're fun, right? So the vehicles that it seems Cherry and all his people are in, certain ones start to get stuck, as Cherry was to advise this superior of his to not drive in this place because they'll just get stuck, and they end up getting stuck. And it's like, Cherry's like, what did I just tell this guy? Like, dude, I knew that we shouldn't have gone here, and he went here anyways. So, the more and more they try with other things to get these trucks kind of out of this thing, and we have Cherry telling him what he should be like using, the superior just gets more and more frustrated and whatever. So we finally have the superior who tells the guys to get into this one of the Humvees and like get the equipment that they need to get these vehicles out of the sand. So the group goes off, and we all of a sudden find out that this group ends up either getting bombed or uh, they drive over a mine and the car explodes. Either way, the vehicle explodes. So they have to go on and take all the dead bodies and put it out of the vehicle, which is like, man, that sucks. But not only that, we have Cherry that has to have to name off all the guys who had died because the other guy didn't know. So we, excuse me. So they end up having to put all these bodies in these body bags, and so we have Cherry who desperately needs to call Emily, and so he has to talk a little bit generically about some of the horrors that he's seen, but he would rather want Emily to just kind of talk about herself. So Emily talks about her being a waitress and stuff like that. So at a certain point, we just have Cherry that just kind of is to kind of get so upset and is to just kind of like end the phone call. So we next have it seem that Cherry is going to like go home. So Cherry is to bizarrely run into this gymnasium with all these other military guys, and so we next up have Cherry who's getting the Medal of Valor medal, and if anything, he doesn't even want this medal or he doesn't even understand why he's getting this medal. If anything, the only reason why he got it was because he was the only one that was still alive. So after that, we finally have Cherry meet Emily. So Emily gives Cherry a tour of their house, and so like since basically Cherry is completely done with the military, he goes on and goes to night school. So we then have Emily work at that night school, and Cherry used to go on and get a job with Joe that pays $8 an hour. So, which again, like, I think when I started doing like retail, I was to get paid like roughly like 7.75, somewhere around there. So, uh, so that seems very odd. I was like, $8 in 2021. That sounds weird. But then again, like eventually when I would start to do like other jobs that like started to get paid way more than that. But then at some point it was just like, okay, I would just go to these other jobs and they'd be like, okay, you could get this. And I'd be like, great, like at least I'm getting paid the same as that other job. But a lot of times you could get paid the same, but the only problem is that like the hours would really change. Like you could go to certain places and you could like get almost like 40 hours a week. I'm like, wow, this is great. And then other times you would go to other jobs and you're lucky if you can get like 10 hours a week. And then you're just like, wow, like what am I even here for? If I'm only to work like 2 days out of the week. Or sometimes like three if they really kind of split hairs about like how long you're really there for. And then it just becomes like, okay, like I'm only here for like 4 hours a day. And yeah, just especially when you have to go on and kind of get up at like 5 in the morning to go to that job because it starts at 5 in the morning, just becomes crazy. So moving on. So we come to find out that like Joe had to help him get that job, so he like went to night school for like no real good reason. So after Joe was to get back from his like military time, it seems that Joe was to come back different. He was to come back drunk. So much so that he would be throwing bottles out of cars, and then he would be like opening doors and just kind of falling out of cars while they were moving. So yeah, it's Joe for you. So Cherry, after he would get back after being in the military, he really couldn't sleep, or when he did sleep, he dreamed of violence. So we're gonna tell you that this guy is gonna just get really just how much can I just slam some drugs down and just chase it with a beer? That sounds right. That sounds like a good combination. So Cherry complains how this is a part where Cherry and Emily are to be at a theater, and he realizes that nobody else is dressing nice like they are at this theater, and Emily's kind of thanking Cherry for like uh, for doing this idea. So, but yeah, Cherry starts to complain how not everyone else is kind of dressed really nice for this occasion, and starts complaining to them, and almost getting into a fight. So Cherry, to just try to calm down, goes in the bathroom and he punches the mirror into the bathroom. And then he grabs Emily. He's like, hey, we need to get out of here. So we come to find out when Cherry and Emily like went home that night, we had James who was to try and go on and do a welcome home party for Cherry. The only thing is that James was to go into the wrong house, and so James ended up getting arrested for uh, breaking and entering. And so when Cherry found that out, Cherry had to bail him out, and so the both of them had kind of spent a lot of time together. So since Cherry, of course, was to continue to have these kind of emotional times and just still dealing with PTSD, we would just have Jerry who would give, or we would just have James who would give Cherry like oxy and all kinds of just medication to numb things out. So he would just pop these pills like crazy. So we have James and Cherry, who are to go to the bank together, and so James is to want to talk to Cherry, or James is want to have Cherry talk to these bank tellers to try to make adjustments for Jerry to get some money out of the bank. So when Cherry starts to talk to these guys, he just starts to call them a-holes and insults them. And so we have Cherry. It's like, well, hey, I want to talk to your bank manager. And it's like, well, you are talking to the bank manager. It's like, well, okay, I guess that's as far as I'm going to go here. So Cherry starts to get addicted to Oxy, so much so that Emily asks what he's taking. And that Emily used to complain of, like, well, hey, like, I needed you for this and you weren't here, and so on and so. And so Cherry's like, well, hey, like, what am I taking? I'm not taking your crap. So I thought that was kind of a funny joke. So Cherry finally promised Emily that he won't take pills anymore to deal with this problem. So Cherry sees this doctor about PTSD. And so while they're talking, we come to find out that Cherry's has already used Xanax for anxiety, and that hasn't been working. And so the doctor's like, well, like, how much, like, pain are you in? And so Cherry's like, well, on a scale from 1 to 10, like a 9 out of 10. So the guy's like, wow. Like, so he's like, well, have you heard of Oxycontin? And so Cherry's like, oh my god, like, that was the drug that I was already on. So Emily finally, like, since Cherry is to be on these drugs, we have Emily that is to just start to get more and more upset how, like, Cherry is to distance himself from her through medication. So Emily gets upset and she starts taking the medication herself. So Emily tells Cherry that she regretted about ever talking about Montreal, and that if she could have gone back time, she would have just changed that whole thing. And we have them going on and talking about how Emily used to have this, like, white ribbon, and she's like, yeah, like, they used to be my jam. So they have them realize that they can't go back uh, and change anything. So they just become addicts instead. So using a dog at some point to try and stop, but that just kept having them just do drugs anyways. So they would kind of just find any way to try to get high as humanly possible. So at some point they had gone on to go broke, so they even started to loan money from off of family. It's like, well, yeah, just wait till that happens. Further and further you go. So we find Cherries to meet up with a guy whose weird name is Pills and Coke. That's his name in this movie for some goofy reason. He's even having that name in IMDb be that of what he is. So we have Cherry, who is to want to call this guy Biff from Back to the Future, but he really actually is just Pills and Coke. So we have at one point where a person that is with uh, Pills and Coke is to want to try one of these drugs that Pills and Coke says is candy. And so we, of course, have Coke, who I'll just state that that's his name, even though it's Pills and Coke. Coke will look at Cherry. It's like, well, hey, should this girl take this drugs? Should she take this candy? And Cherry is just like, ah. So we have Pills and Coke that is not very sure if he should go on and let Cherry get any more drugs. So what he does is like, well, hey, like I'm gonna have this safe, and it's gonna be from a guy named Black. And so if you go on and you take this safe, like I will go on and give you the money so that way you can do more drugs. So Cherry goes on and takes this safe. And so they start to go on and do more drugs. And Emily's like, well, you know that probably in this safe there's going to be like a lot of the good drugs and a lot of just drugs in general. So these guys get so tempted that they want drugs that they are to try and figure out ways to destroy this safe. And they go on and do all kinds of things, but eventually they do open the safe. We even have Cherry, who is to think that James is some kind of locksmith. So they open the safe, and so we have after that where all of a sudden there's a knock at the door. And so whoever is knocking at the door is saying that they're police. Like, oh my god, scramble, get all the drugs, flush them down the toilet, do whatever you need to do. So by the time that Cherry gets to the door, come to find out it's just joking around, it's pills and coke. So we all of a sudden have pills and coke that realizes that the safe is completely empty, and we have Coke who's like, well, how much was there in this safe? And they're like, I don't know, a lot. And so he's like, oh my god. So he's like, dude, if I don't go on and I don't have this like a ton of money for this safe, then then I'm gonna like be killed, you're gonna get killed, Emily's gonna get killed. So what Cherry does is he's like, well, hey, I have a plan. So he immediately goes on to rob this bank uh, to pay for the empty safe. So both Emily and Cherry start to get sick the more and more that they are without drugs or withholding without drugs. So when the drug money starts to run out, Emily desperately cries out to Cherry to tell him to rob another bank. So Cherry has someone say he looks sick while he's robbing one of these banks, and we have Cherry that says, "Oh no, I'm just having a stuffed up nose. Like it'll all be fine." So we get to a point in this movie where Cherry's just consistently going on and robbing so many banks that we even have pills and coke that says like man, like you're robbing so many banks, but still you owe me money. You owe me a lot of money. So like how is that possible that you still owe me money and you're robbing all these banks? So we forcibly have Cherry who's telling uh pills and coke that he's gonna go on and rob another bank while pills and coke is going to be the driver. And so pills and coke is like, wait a minute, like no. Like, hey man, like you didn't tell me that like I was gonna be here for this. And so it's like, hey man, we need to set up rules and stuff like that. So we have Cherry that tries to go on and like quickly just rob this bank. So we have, while Cherry is robbing this bank, it seems that oftentimes they only give him a certain amount of money because they're like, well, hey, that's the only amount that I'm willing to give you. And so Cherry goes on to try and rob this bank, and this girl's like, well, hey, here's what I'm going to give you. And so the girl ends up saying like some crap to Cherry, but like, well, how could you go on and justify doing this? And so he's like, well, hey, like I fought for this country, and then he runs off. So we, after like Cherry's to give Pills and Coke more money, we have Cherry at home who is sick. Emily comes home and it was expecting some drugs, but she didn't get any, so she crapped her pants. So Emily goes home to get high and ends up in the hospital. So Emily's parents are to kind of look into Emily. So Emily's mother tells Cherry that she wants him to leave or she's going to beat him up. He's going to hurt him. She's going to hurt him. So Emily is to get off this bus that she had gone to rehab and then gotten off this bus. So Cherry's to meet Emily there at this bus stop. So Emily wants to come back to Cherry, and Cherry is to hear noises in his head, and Cherry wants Emily to just go back onto the bus and go back to rehab or just go back to her family and whatever. And so Emily is like, well, hey, like, I want to get high, and I'm going to do it with or without you. So Cherry gets high, and so, or Emily gets high, and so Cherry goes on to kind of carry Emily to bed. So Cherry robs yet another bank with Coke and James. So James is to need to go with Cherry to kind of get like bags of money and so on and so forth. And it seems that James is desperate to get money also. So when both James and Cherry go into this bank, James chickens out, and so Cherry's to need to have to like run out of this bank without collecting any money. So we have them giving James crap for how he chickened out, and so now we have Coke who's to go on and need to go with Cherry to this bank to rob it. And so what happens is that Coke is like, well, I'm going to want the gun then. So Coke goes into the bank and is to shoot somewhere in this bank. And for what I'm assessing, like the only way, because for some reason Coke ends up getting shot here, which doesn't make sense to me. I'm assuming that at some point maybe the shot that that Coke must have shot might have ricocheted and maybe it hit him, and that's how he is to be shot somehow. It doesn't quite make sense to me, but that must be how he could have gotten shot, because they don't explain how Coke was to have a bullet in his chest, but maybe he was to have already had that, who knows. Anyways, pushing on. So we have Coke that leaves Cherry, and so we come to find out that Cherry is to have gotten trapped within this bank, and so he forces them to open the bank so he could leave. So Cherry runs off to get to James, and so now Cherry and James are just driving off, and they're like, well, hey, we need to go and get Coke, man, because like he's gonna go on and rat us out. So They find Coke, they get him to the car, and he's starting to bleed out. So we have Coke, who I think is kind of pleading to go to the hospital, but they're like, no, we can't bring him to the hospital because, like, anybody will know, like, he was in this robbery. So what happens is just Coke bleeds out, and so they kind of dump him off to the side somewhere. They couldn't have just dumped him at some hospital. So we next up find that Cherry's on some bench somewhere getting high. So we have Cherry and Emily that see Black, who is to be Pills and Coke's boss. So Cherry tells Emily to go in the house while he talks with Black. So come to find out, Black won't kill Cherry because he won't get the money that he needs. So Cherry wants, of course, the teller to hit the alarm, because we are back full circle to where we were in the beginning of the movie, where Cherry went off to have Black be his driver, so on and so forth. So, and we have the girl that was to have sadness in her face. So Cherry's to go on and tell this bank to hit this alarm, this silent alarm, and so we have Cherry that gives Black the money and shoots in the air multiple times, hoping that the police cars will see him. And so Cherry does drugs and put it into his foot, and so we then have Cherry that goes to prison. Cherry, we just see a lot of just prison scenes of him working out or him going into possible therapy, and him maybe becoming like the head of this like number of people that do therapy. And so it seems that Cherry is to do so well, he is to be up for parole, and he gets parole. So by the time that Cherry ends up getting released, we find out that Emily is waiting for him. It's like, oh, so she was alive after all. She didn't like OD or whatever. Maybe she got her life together as well as Cherry got his life together. So maybe that was just kind of a fresh start. Or maybe we would find out something horrible, like Emily had been selling her money for drugs all this time. And then when Cherry was to. I don't know. There could be some dark story that we don't know anything about here. So with that said, I think I'm just going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.